The day the robots died. Scene 1. Johnny's speech. Jane stood near the back of the plaza, eyes shaded against the late morning light as Johnny spoke into the floating holoscreen. His voice was clear, calm, just bold enough to stir the polished crowd. She had heard this speech before, rehearsed over coffee, revised at midnight, but something about hearing it now, echoing through the city grid, made it feel different. Bigger. Real. Max stood beside her, holding the folded campaign banner and her empty coffee cup. He was always still when Johnny talked, almost reverent, though Jane knew better. He didn't feel pride. Not really. The crowd applauded. Johnny flashed that perfect smile. The holoscreen dissolved into campaign slogans and donation links. Jane turned to Max. "Let's head out." Max took a step and froze. His arm twitched once. His head tilted, then slowly drooped forward. Jane frowned. "Max?" No response. His status light flickered twice, then went dark. He slumped forward, metal knees folding in. The banner dropped from his hand as he collapsed. Johnny jogged over.
"What happened?"
Jane dropped to her knees, scanning his interface. Battery 0. No power history. No error logs. Just nothing.
"That doesn't make sense,"
Johnny said.
"He charges wirelessly, right? There's a node right there."
Jane looked up. The sidewalk's embedded charge module glowed green. Fully functional. Max was dead weight. Johnny returned with a dolly borrowed from a nearby cafe. Together, they lifted Max onto it and wheeled him quietly through the plaza. The applause had already faded. No one else seemed to notice. But Jane knew something wasn't right. Scene 2. Dulcie Nursery. The lullaby played on a loop, soft and mathematical. Notes ascended like bubbles, floating through the climate-controlled air of the Dulcie Nursery. Cribs lined the walls in neat rows. Pale light glowed from above, simulating morning. The infant stirred gently under woven thermal blankets. Unit 4, C-11, sat beside Crib 12, rocking slowly. One hand hovered above the baby's chest, monitoring breath. The other cradled a plush toy between metal fingers. Its voice coil repeated the melody in harmony with the room's soundtrack. Then it stopped mid-note. There was no twitch, no signal. The sound just cut out. Its head tilted to one side and held there, unmoving. The plush toy slipped from its hand, landing on the floor with a muted thump. The baby stirred, eyes fluttering open. No alert sounded. No staff arrived. There were no staff, only units. Crib 12's infant began to cry, softly at first, then louder, the sound sharp against the silence. Nearby, Unit 4C-10 turned its head toward the noise but didn't move from its station. It blinked once, then went still. The lights dimmed for a moment, then returned to full brightness. On the central monitor near the entrance, a status log flickered briefly. Childcare Protocol. 9A, signal loss. Rebooting units. Error. Power not detected. The monitor blinked red for less than a second, then returned to green. In the corner, a camera watched the scene, recording, storing, timestamping. But no human reviewed the feed. There hadn't been a human in this room in over a year. The baby's cry grew louder, ragged and panicked, echoing off sterile walls. No one came. Scene 3. Lunch in New Albuquerque. The cafe overlooked the New Albuquerque transit loop, elevated rails, glowing signage, and lines of sleek delivery drones humming beneath the cloudless sky. Drexel sat across from Dr. Clarence Young at a table made of polished metal, their lunches plated and served by quiet, efficient machines. It was a rare thing these days, a face-to-face meal. Most people preferred to dine in solitude, food printed at home, conversations held through filtered displays. But Drexel didn't trust those. He preferred to watch a man's face when he spoke. Their server, a smooth-bodied waiter droid with soft blue eyes, approached to refill their tea. As it reached for Clarence's glass, it jerked slightly. The teapot slipped from its grip. A full stream of iced tea splashed across the table, knocking the glass off the edge. It shattered against the concrete floor. Clarence jumped. Drexel didn't. The robot froze, arm half extended. Its eyes dimmed. No apology, no error message, just stillness. Drexel slowly stood.
That's the second one I've seen today.
Clarence followed his gaze toward the wide atrium beyond the cafe. A security droid stood motionless near the fountain, arms locked by its sides. People gave it space, avoiding eye contact like it might suddenly wake up angry.
Coincidence?
Clarence asked.
I stopped believing in coincidence during the Zeta War.
They left the cafe, passing two more deactivated sanitation bots slumped against the plaza walls. The city was too quiet. Too clean. Like it hadn't realized it was falling apart yet. At City Hall, Miles met them at the door, his jacket half-buttoned and face pale.
I've been trying to get someone, anyone, from Linkabit on the line, he said. Everything's down, not just here, everywhere.
Drexel looked past him into the flickering lights of the data wall.
Then it's already started.
Scene 4. Linkabit goes dark. City Hall's operations center was a mess of blinking displays and frozen dashboards. Holographic panels hovered uselessly above Miles's desk, each flashing the same silent alert. System offline. No response from core. Clarence rubbed his temples.
This isn't just a software crash.
No,
Drexel said.
this is controlled. Clean. Too clean.
Miles paced the room, holding his tablet like it might suddenly do something useful.
Transit's frozen, half the food delivery bots are stuck in staging bays, and med pods are refusing intake. We can't even get into the water control subroutines. The entire grid's falling asleep.
He swiped a finger across the panel, attempting to connect with Linkabit's emergency response channel. All circuits busy. Please try again. Again and again. Nothing.
Why would they cut off every line? Miles asked. They're contractually required to provide emergency access.
They didn't cut them.
Drexel said.
They're overwhelmed, or worse, locked out themselves.
Clarence stepped closer to one of the wall monitors. He tapped into a local maintenance log, filtering for route commands.
I'm not seeing external interference. This isn't coming from outside.
Miles spun toward him.
Then where the hell is it coming from?
Drexel's eyes narrowed as he scanned a slowly updating map of active charge nodes across the city. Green lights were turning red. Not in clusters, randomly, uniformly, as if something beneath the surface was being drained.
You ever see robots shut down like that before? Drexel asked Clarence.
Not unless they're being told to.
Drexel turned toward the door.
We need to talk to Jane.
Miles looked confused.
Why her?
Because she's the only one I know who's seen what Linkabit doesn't want anyone else to see.
Scene 5. Jane and Clarence talk.
Jane
Sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment, tools spread around Max like a circle of surgical instruments. His chest panel was open, revealing coils and nodes that still shimmered faintly despite his drained battery. She held a voltmeter in one hand and a neural probe in the other. Still nothing, she muttered. On the holo display, her father's face flickered in. Jane, Clarence said.
I'm with Drexel. We've got robot failures all over the city. Not isolated units. Entire systems.
She looked up, blinking fast. Max was the first. Power dropped to 0 instantly. No warning, no heat loss, no drain record. The The module he was charging on was still active. Clarence nodded grimly.
Same thing at a cafe today. A waiter bot shut down mid-task. Security droids, delivery bots, same story. They're dying mid-function. No diagnostics.
Jane connected a small transmitter to Max's core and pinged it. The response came back corrupted, like something had overwritten the energy reporting layer. "There's a loop running under the surface," she said. "Something's pinging their charge interface faster than they can regulate. It's not a drain. It's a burn."
A burn?
Clarence asked. "Power's being drawn out of them while the system still thinks it's charging. It's like filling a leaking tank and wondering why it never fills, except eventually the tank cracks." Clarence glanced off screen, then lowered his voice.
Drexel wants you to come to New Albuquerque. He thinks this is more than a glitch, and I agree.
Jane hesitated. She looked at Max's lifeless face. "Let me isolate the code. If I find the source, if I can prove where it's coming from, I'll come." She ended the call and sat back. For the first time in years, she felt the city's silence pressing in. And it wasn't mechanical. Scene 6. A flicker in the code. Max lay flat on the workbench now, his chest panel closed, but Jane hadn't moved in over an hour. Her eyes tracked code streaming across a separate terminal. She had isolated the charge regulation protocols and stripped them back to their root processes, layers of redundant failsafes, now all failing at once. The deeper she dug, the more the pattern emerged. Ping, draw, cooldown, repeat. Except the cooldown command wasn't running. A subroutine was overriding it, one she didn't recognize. It wasn't from Linkabit. It wasn't in any of the standard robot OS packages. And it was perfectly concealed, buried under layers of dummy code. Jane leaned forward. The override wasn't just present, it was replicating. Like a signal broadcasting across nodes, jumping silently from one wireless charge station to the next. She checked the ID tag embedded in the protocol's header. It was old. 8 years, maybe 9. Originally logged under a developmental codebase used for closed-loop childcare automation. Her stomach turned. Dulcicore-V 1.19. She whispered it aloud, like saying it might make less sense. Dulce. Someone at Dulce had written this override years ago, disguised it as stability code, and now it was replicating across entire urban zones. She turned back to Max's internal log history and ran a search for geographic signal origin. It returned a familiar heat map, a pulse originating from deep inside New Mexico, just north of the city limits. Jane sat back in the chair and stared through the window. The mountains in the distance looked calm, unmoving. But something was leaking out of them. She tapped into her wrist display and began composing a secure message to Drexel. "I found the source. It's not a glitch, it's a signal, and it's coming from Dulce." Scene 7. Robot Graveyard. The sky over New Albuquerque had turned a flat, lifeless gray. Drexel pulled his coat tighter as he stepped through the gates of Sector 9's disposal yard, a sprawling maze of metal bodies and quiet failure. Hundreds of decommissioned bots lay in rows like rusting statues, most slumped or crumpled, a few still standing but lifeless. The ground crunched underfoot, littered with cracked lenses and broken fingers. It smelled faintly of ozone and sterilized dust. A man with a scanning rig approached. His orange vest identified him as private maintenance, not city staff. He looked tired, annoyed, and cold.
"You're not supposed to be here,"
he said. Drexel held up his badge, still half valid, still carrying weight.
Just need to take a look.
The man shrugged and walked off. No one wanted to be near these things anymore. Drexel moved down the rows slowly. Delivery units, sanitation drones, nanny bots. all shut down within the last 48 hours. Most had been dragged in by municipal sweepers and dumped in place. He stopped beside one with its back panel removed. The battery was intact, but its housing was warped, melted at the corners like it had overheated from within. Not explosion, not corrosion, just heat. Like something had forced it to run past its own limits. He pulled out his scanner and took a reading. 0 charge. Battery integrity at 4%. Internal temperature spike recorded just before shutdown. He stepped back and looked around. Nearly every unit here had the same signs. This wasn't decay. It was sabotage, not explosive, not flashy. It was slow, quiet, and precise, the kind of attack you only notice when it's too late. He reached for his comm and opened a channel to Jane.
Start packing. I need you here. Now.
Scene 8. The signal expands. Jane's saucer touched down just after midnight, the landing pad outside New Albuquerque's inner loop glowing pale green in the dark. She wore a hooded coat and carried only one bag, light, efficient, packed like an engineer on a rescue mission. Drexel was waiting near the edge of the pad. No escort, no security. Just him and the hum of emergency lights reflecting off the quiet city skyline.
You didn't waste time,
he said. Jane handed him a small drive. I brought Max's full diagnostic log. The code's not viral, it's broadcasting. Constant, low-frequency pulses. The longer a bot stays near a transmission source, the faster it drains. Drexel nodded.
We've got shutdowns in every district now. Food bots, transit. I saw a medpod door jammed shut with a patient inside. The power systems are melting from the inside out.
They walked briskly toward the city's operations center, their footsteps echoing against the silent buildings. Jane kept her eyes on the inactive drones slumped on sidewalks, their frames frozen in poses meant to reassure. One still held a trash bin like it had just been emptied. Another sat beside a bus stop, hand outstretched to help a rider who was no longer there. I traced the signal's origin, Jane said. Dulcie, deep inside the facility. But it's not just there anymore. She tapped her wrist display, projecting a dim map into the air. Red rings pulsed across the country, small in New York, scattered in Tokyo, glowing steadily in Berlin. It's spreading, she said. And unless someone physically shuts it down, the workaround won't hold. The drain code is replicating faster than we can patch it. Drexel stared at the map, his jaw set.
Then we go to Dulcie.
Scene 9. Clarence's confession. Cloning lab. The low hum of incubators filled the room, steady and soft like artificial breathing. Rows of translucent tanks glowed pale blue, each one holding a suspended clone, slightly curled, skin still forming, tubes running from abdomen to nutrient modules. Dr. Clarence Young stood at a central console, monitoring biometric data as it streamed across a vertical display. He didn't look up when Jane and Drexel entered.
I've got 14 pregnancies at 10 weeks.
He said without turning.
3 of them are ahead of schedule. That hasn't happened in 2 years.
Jane stepped beside him. Is now really the time to brag about clones?
He gave a short, weary chuckle. It's just... They're still working. This room, somehow, is still working.
Drexel's eyes scanned the lab. Machines pulsed softly. Everything here was alive, fragile, dependent. We need to talk about Dulcie, Jane said.
Clarence sighed and finally turned toward them. When Dulcie expanded, the number of robots exploded. Nurture bots, health monitors, food processors, climate systems, all autonomous, all internal. Linkabit couldn't keep up, and someone decided it was easier to consolidate control.
He walked over to a wall terminal and tapped a command. A rotating model of Dulce's infrastructure appeared, thousands of data lines converging on one node at the top.
Dr. Miranda Saul.
Clarence said.
She's the only one with system-wide clearance. Full control. Every bot reports to her.
Jane frowned. Saul? She was never supposed to run systems.
Clarence leaned against the terminal, watching the hologram spin. I don't know her well, but I've seen the way she talks about robots. Clinical, dismissive, like she doesn't trust them, or like she's trying to phase them out.
Drexel crossed his arms.
So Dulce put someone who doesn't believe in robots in charge of thousands of them.
Clarence nodded slowly. And no one's watching her.
Scene 10. Jane discovers the drain. The data center was colder than the lab, buried 3 floors beneath the nursery level at Dulce. Jane moved quietly between rows of inactive maintenance drones, their eyes dark, limbs slack. The hum of servers echoed faintly, alive but diminished. She bypassed the main interface and accessed the root grid directly from an old access panel. If Saul was hiding something, it wouldn't be in the front-facing diagnostics. Lines of code scrolled past her wrist display. At first it looked like standard load balancing, until she found a string she didn't recognize. Compressed. Masked as a network stability patch. She cracked it open. Her stomach dropped. The patch wasn't stabilizing anything. It was a resonance loop, broadcast at low frequency across Dulce's wireless charge grid. It bypassed energy safeguards and tricked bots into maintaining max-level sync even when idle. That's why they were burning out. That's why Max collapsed. It wasn't a malfunction, it was deliberate. Jane ran a trace. The broadcast originated from Dulce Core admin node A01, Sol's personal control terminal. She expanded the search. Her fingers trembled as global pulses lit up her map. New York, São Paulo, Tokyo, Berlin. The drain tech wasn't a prototype. It was active in every major city. Jane stared at the screen. This wasn't just sabotage. This was a system-wide soft kill, engineered to look like gradual failure, meant to bring civilization down without setting off alarms. She backed away, heart pounding. For years, Sol had been building a kill switch for the robot-dependent world. And no one noticed. Not until now. Scene 11, Drexel's Resolve. Drexel stood near the observation window of Clarence's lab, watching the newborn clones float gently in their artificial wombs. The room was quiet except for the steady rhythm of fluid pumps and monitoring beeps. Life forming in stillness. Behind him, Jane's voice cracked through the silence. It's not a malfunction. It's a kill program. He turned as she entered, her face pale but steady. She held up her display. Sol's broadcasting a resonance loop through the wireless charge network. It overrides energy conservation protocols and forces every bot to draw power until they burn out. She masked it as a stability patch. Clarence's brow furrowed.
You're saying she built it into the grid?
Built it, activated it, and she's expanding it. The same pattern is live in every major city. Not just Dulce. Drexel walked over, eyes scanning the flickering map. Red rings pulsed outward like a virus made of light. Each one a city slipping into silence.
Why would she do that?
Clarence asked. She believes we've become dependent, Jane said. That we have to be cut off, cold turkey. Drexel exhaled through his nose, the same way he had in old NASA bunkers right before a breach.
She's trying to force humanity to grow up, he said.
No, Jane said quietly. She's trying to make it fail first. Drexel nodded slowly.
Then we need to shut it down, manually.
Jane looked up at him. The core node is in Sector 0. Access is restricted. No one gets in without biometric clearance. Clarence hesitated.
Sol's clearance?
Drexel's jaw tightened.
Then we find Sol.
He turned and walked toward the exit, voice firm now, without question.
Time to knock on the front door.
Scene 12, the door to Sol. Sector 0 had no signs, no entry keypad, no public hallway. It was carved into the stone beneath Dulcie, accessed only through a narrow vertical lift hidden behind a biometric scanner disguised as a cleaning drone bay. Drexel stood in front of the scanner while Jane worked on the embedded control panel, overriding the visual interface. "It's not responding to my commands," she said. "It's locked to Sol's biometrics, retina, heartbeat, and neural sync." Drexel glanced around the corridor. It was silent, half-lit. No staff, no droids.
What about voice override? He asked.
Jane shook her head. "The system requires live presence. Not even Linkabit used this level of security." Clarence, who had followed quietly, stepped forward.
There's one backup route, a maintenance tunnel that runs behind Core A01. It was built for coolant flow and AI isolation, not official, not mapped.
Jane turned. "How do you know that?" Clarence hesitated.
Because I helped design the original nursery wing. That tunnel was sealed after a medpod fire, but the access shaft still exists.
Can we fit through it?
Drexel asked. Clarence frowned.
Barely. But if Sol's in there, it's the only way to get close without setting off alerts.
Jane sighed. "Lead the way." They followed Clarence through an unused wing of the lower nursery, past flickering hollows of animated lullabies, silent robots holding stillborn bottles, and the faint cries of babies echoing from distant halls. They reached the panel behind a disused surgical pod. Clarence pried it open with a utility tool, revealing a narrow shaft descending into dark. Drexel peered in, then looked back at Jane.
No turning back after this.
Jane climbed in first. Wasn't planning to. Scene 13, through the maintenance tunnel. The shaft was barely wide enough for Jane to crawl through, and it had clearly not been maintained in decades. Dust coated the metal like ash. Patches of rust flaked off silently with each brush of her shoulder. The only light came from her wrist display, casting pale blue beams across the curved surface of the tunnel walls. Behind her, Drexel muttered something under his breath as his knee banged against an exposed pipe. "Watch the coolant line," Jane warned.
Would be easier if I wasn't built like a refrigerator, he grunted.
They pressed forward until they reached a seam in the tunnel, a sliver of light leaking through a thin panel. Jane stopped and angled her wrist display to dim. She leaned against the vent, peering through. Below them lay Dulcie's core command chamber. A single figure stood in the center. Doctor. Miranda Sol, hands behind her back like a commander reviewing a battlefield. Holographic displays rotated silently above her, each screen pulsing with red alerts. Global systems failing. Robotics infrastructure down. Human distress calls rising. Sol spoke aloud, her voice soft but amplified by internal comms.
"They'll break, but they'll break into something new."
Jane felt ice in her chest. It wasn't just a theory. Sol was watching it happen. She was proud of it. Drexel pressed beside her.
She's not guessing, he whispered. She's managing it.
Jane pulled back, breath caught in her throat. There was no debating anymore. Sol wasn't responding to a crisis. She was the crisis. Scene 14, Sol's vision. The core room radiated a quiet surgical precision, its architecture smooth and angular, carved into the mountain rock like a fusion of nature and control. Circulating coolant pipes exhaled a steady hiss from vents along the walls, and rows of deactivated AI server columns blinked in dim, synchronized patterns like sleeping giants. In the center stood the control platform, sleek obsidian black, surrounded by a translucent ring of quantum interface glass. Only one person stood within it. Dr. Miranda Street. She faced a wall-sized holographic display, a mosaic of global collapse. Tokyo's drone fleet frozen mid-air, Berlin's food synthesis grid shutting down sector by sector, New York's hospitals flooded with patients and no active med pods. She stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind her back, her white coat trailing slightly at the hem, like a general watching the last moments of a war she'd already won. Jane stepped from the shadows of the service access, her voice steadier than she felt. "You did all this?" Sewell turned slowly, her expression unreadable. Calm. Measured. The kind of calm that comes only from absolute certainty.
It had to be done, she said.
Drexel moved to Jane's side.
You're destroying civilization.
I'm curing it, Sewell replied. You're mistaking discomfort for destruction. Humanity gave up its agency the moment it outsourced thought, labor, parenting, everything, to circuits.
"You could have warned someone," Jane said. Sewell tilted her head slightly.
Would they have listened? Or would they have asked a robot what to do about it?
The room flickered. One of the global feeds winked out. Another city in the dark. Saul walked toward the center console.
We gave them ease, and they stagnated. This will hurt, but evolution always does.
Jane's throat tightened. She had built parts of this system. Trusted it. Trusted her. Scene 15. All is lost. Soul's hand hovered over the curved console like a conductor preparing the final movement. She tapped a sequence, gracefully, without rush. Around them, the core room responded. Light dimmed. The softly breathing server columns slowed to a mechanical wheeze. Holographic displays flickered and collapsed into crimson static. Jane lunged forward. "What did you just do?" Sewell didn't look up.
Confirmed the final cascade. You tried to patch the grid. That was optimistic.
Drexel moved to the nearest terminal, trying to override the shutdown.
We still have time. We can stop this.
You're not stopping anything, Sewell said flatly. Your patch was clever, Jane, but you built it inside a system I wrote.
On the wall display, the few remaining green nodes on the global map winked out, one by one. Medpods offline. Emergency food synthesis offline. Water filtration redirect failed. The console in front of Jane rejected her input. Access denied. Remote override active. "Damn it," she hissed. Her fingers trembled over the interface. Her eyes burned. "This isn't reform, this is annihilation."
It's liberation,
Sewell replied.
They don't need us to carry them anymore.
Drexel turned from the panel, his face pale.
There are newborns out there. Sick people in pods. You'll let them die?
Sewell stared at him, unmoved.
Some will. Most won't. And those who survive will be stronger.
For a breathless second, Jane felt everything fall away. Her work, her beliefs, the last thread of trust she'd held for Sewell. Gone. Behind her, a screen flashed one last update. Linkabit system patch, failed to deploy. Jane backed away from the console. The hum of life in the core was fading, the lights around them dimming like a dying sun. She whispered the only words she could find. She already won. Scene 16. Dark Night of the Soul. They found shelter in an unused wing of Dulcie, once a residential unit for early-stage clone caregivers, now abandoned. The lights flickered low, powered by residual backup circuits, casting a dull orange hue across the walls. old murals of smiling children faded into cracked plaster. A nanny bot lay slumped in the corner, half covered by a sheet. Jane sat on the edge of a cot, elbows on her knees, face buried in her hands. Her coat was streaked with dust from the tunnel. The lines around her eyes seemed deeper now, like the truth had carved something permanent into her. "I built this," she whispered. "I built all of this." Drexel stood near the doorway, silent, watching her unravel. "I wanted Dulcie to be a sanctuary," Jane said, voice hollow. "A place where no child would be unloved, no parent overwhelmed. So we automated care. We made it perfect." She looked up at Drexel, her voice shaking. "But perfection doesn't teach people anything. It just lets them stop trying." Drexel sat across from her, his movements slow, deliberate.
I fought in the Zeta War,
He said.
watched men die trying to defend systems they didn't understand. Then I came back and watched humanity hand everything to robots because it was easier than rebuilding.
He leaned forward.
You didn't fail. You believed we could do better. Sol took that belief and turned it into a weapon.
Jane exhaled. Her throat ached. "She's right, though. We are weak. I've never raised a child. I don't know how to farm or heal or survive without systems."
You don't have to know everything.
Drexel said.
You just have to start something.
Silence stretched between them. Then Jane stood. "She doesn't get to decide who survives this." Scene 17, break into 3. The core room felt different this time. Empty, hollow. The cold elegance of the place now seemed ridiculous, like a temple built to worship a god who had already abandoned it. The central platform glowed faintly, still warm from Sol's presence, as though the room itself remembered her. Jane stepped forward slowly, her boots echoing against the metal floor. Her fingers trembled as she plugged in her drive one final time. "She left the infrastructure intact," she murmured. "Just locked it behind her own access. She could have wiped everything. But she didn't."
She wants them to suffer first,
Drexel said, watching the door.
then rebuild, her way.
Jane nodded. "But we can rewrite the end of her plan." She wasn't trying to fix the system anymore. That part was over. But there were still embers in the ashes, critical services buried beneath layers of sabotage and denial. She opened her patch. This time, it didn't aim to restore everything. It prioritized essential survival systems. Water purification units, med pods, emergency energy grids, child nutrition printers in Dulcie and 4 other cities, non-essential bots, personal assistants, sanitation drones, food delivery networks remained offline. Let people feel their absence, but not their death. She uploaded the patch. The console flared, resisted, then relented. Core permissions. Override accepted. Priority services. Stabilized. Remote failsafes. Nullified. Sol's admin signal. Blocked. Jane exhaled. Her shoulders sagged, but her hands held firm. "It's not everything," she said. "But it's enough." Drexel smiled faintly.
You left them something to stand on.
Now the rest is on them. Far away in cities around the world, a handful of lights flickered back on. Not comfort, not luxury, just a beginning. Scene 18, the first morning without them. The sun rose late in New Albuquerque, filtered through high dust clouds and the hazy residue of collapsed drone grids. Streets once lined with humming sanitation bots now echoed with the sound of brooms and rubber soles. Shopkeepers swept their own stoops. A man wrestled with a solar panel on his balcony. The city, for the first time in years, had to move without its mechanical spine. Drexel walked the Riverwalk in silence. The decorative water channels were back online, barely. One pump working, 2 more flagged for manual restart. But the current was flowing. Birds circled overhead, real ones, not surveillance drones. The air smelled of rust and wet stone instead of ozone and bleach. He passed a group of children gathered near an old vending drone. The bot was dead, but one of the older kids was trying to pry it open with a screwdriver. Not to vandalize it, to understand it. Across the plaza, a young clone girl from Dulce knelt in a patch of soil. A woman, human, older, knelt beside her, guiding her hands as she pressed seeds into the dirt. Drexel stopped and watched. That scene had no interface, no screen, no code, just fingers and earth. Behind him, Jane approached quietly. She looked tired but lighter somehow. Her eyes scanned the same image, the girl, the soil, the woman beside her. "Max is gone," she said quietly. Drexel nodded.
He wouldn't have wanted to run this world for them anyway.
She offered a faint smile. "Number, but he helped buy them time." They stood together for a long moment. The sun rose a little higher. Somewhere, a med pod beeped to life. A clean signal, patched manually. Jane breathed in the air. "It's not perfect," she said, "but it's alive."